The general's laughter cut through the desert air as she stepped up to the firing line. They'd brought her here as an afterthought, a relic to contrast with their billion-dollar targeting system. When she input coordinates for a target over 4 miles away, the mockery turned to open ridicule. "Physically impossible," he announced to his assembled staff. 7 seconds after she pulled the trigger, the distant target vaporized on 3 different monitoring screens. In the silence that followed, everything changed. Some weapons can't be programmed. They must be taught. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story resonates with you, consider subscribing for more untold stories of extraordinary people who changed history without seeking the spotlight. Dawn broke over Nevada's classified proving grounds, heat already rippling across the horizon where jagged mountains met the cloudless sky. Brigadier General Harlan Westfield strode purposefully across the tarmac toward a cluster of monitoring stations and high-ranking officials. His chest, adorned with rows of decorations, expanded with each confident step. Behind him followed 6 defense contractors in bespoke suits, each carrying identical tablets displaying the proprietary Atlas targeting system interface. The air around them buzzed with anticipation. "Gentlemen," Westfield called out, his voice carrying across the desert morning, "today marks the culmination of 7 years and $2 billion in development, the end of human error in battlefield precision." In stark contrast to the gathering dignitaries, Specialist Lorelei Thorne sat alone at the edge of the assembly. Dressed in standard BDUs with no rank insignia visible, she methodically cleaned an old wooden-stocked rifle that appeared almost comically outdated compared to the sleek technological array surrounding her. A junior officer approached, awkwardly handing her a visitor badge labeled Logistics Observer. "You'll need to wear this at all times, ma'am," he said, studying her with obvious curiosity. Lorelei pinned it without comment, her focus returning to her rifle. "The Atlas system," Westfield continued, commanding the attention of everyone except Lorelei, "removes the final variable from the equation, the trigger puller." He gestured toward a robotic platform mounted with what appeared to be a next-generation weapons system. Human reaction time, respiration, pulse variations, all eliminated. Colonel Atticus Meacham, standing slightly apart from Westfield's entourage, watched Lorelei with quiet intensity. When she finally looked up, something flickered across his weathered face. Recognition, perhaps, or concern. "For comparison purposes only," Westfield added with a dismissive wave toward Lorelei, "we've brought in a traditional marksman." The comment drew knowing chuckles from the contractors and several of the junior officers. Lorelei remained focused on her weapon, her fingers moving with practiced precision across metal and wood that showed signs of extensive use. The rifle bore no manufacturer markings, its wooden stock worn smooth from years of handling. Even to the untrained eye, it was clearly custom work, though nothing about it suggested advanced technology. Major Farron, one of Westfield's aides, leaned toward his superior. "Sir, about the Observer," he said quietly. "Her paperwork came through unusual channels." "Just protocol," Westfield replied without concern. "These demonstrations require civilian oversight, Defense Department bureaucracy." The morning progressed with choreographed efficiency. Westfield guided the officials through increasingly impressive demonstrations of the Atlas system. Targets appeared at varying distances, and each time the robotic platform acquired, calculated, and neutralized with mechanical perfection. 2,000 meters with crosswind compensation, announced the system operator as another target disintegrated. "Time to target acquisition, 1.3 seconds. Appreciative murmurs rippled through the crowd. A silver-haired senator nodded approvingly, already imagining the congressional hearing where he would champion this new technology. "What we're witnessing today," Westfield continued, warming to his audience, "is the future of battlefield engagement. Human snipers require years of training, are subject to fatigue, emotional variables, and physiological limitations." He gestured toward the data scrolling across nearby monitors. "Atlas eliminates these weaknesses." Throughout the presentation, Colonel Meacham's attention remained divided between the demonstration and Lorelei, who had finished with her rifle and now sat observing with unnerving stillness. Something about her composure seemed to trouble him. During a brief recess, Meacham approached Westfield. "A word, General," he said quietly, guiding him slightly away from the group. "What is it, Colonel?" Westfield asked, irritation evident in his tone. "We're on a tight schedule." "The Observer," Meacham said, his voice lowered. "I believe I've seen her before, in classified briefings regarding Operation Thistledown." Westfield's expression shifted to momentary confusion. "Thistledown? That was a ghost story, unconfirmed field reports from Syria and Yemen." "Nevertheless," Meacham pressed, "protocol suggests we should offer a demonstration opportunity to all qualified personnel present." Westfield glanced at his watch. "Fine. We'll give her 5 minutes at the end. It'll highlight the contrast effectively." As the morning demonstration concluded, Westfield addressed the gathering with evident satisfaction. "Any questions before we break for lunch?" Colonel Meacham cleared his throat. "Perhaps a comparative demonstration would be instructive, sir. Our observer seems qualified." Westfield's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. Always good to remember where we started." He turned toward Lorelei. "Specialist, would you care to demonstrate traditional marksmanship methods for our guests?" Lorelei rose without hurry, gathering her rifle in the leather pouch that had rested beside her. As she approached the firing platform, the defense contractors exchanged amused glances. One whispered something that made the others chuckle. "Our observer will demonstrate conventional long-range engagement," Westfield announced, a hint of theatrical indulgence in his tone. "A baseline for appreciating Atlas's advancements." Lorelei accessed the range control system without hesitation. Her fingers moved across the interface with unexpected familiarity, inputting coordinates and parameters. Westfield glanced at the screen, his expression shifting from polite tolerance to confusion. "Specialist, there must be an error in your inputs," he said. "The farthest target is at 2.3 miles. "I'm adjusting for a target at 418 miles, sir," Lorelei replied, her voice quiet but clear. The atmosphere changed perceptibly. Several officials exchanged puzzled looks. "There is no target at that distance," Westfield stated firmly. "And even if there were, such a shot would be physically impossible with conventional equipment. The ballistic limitations alone—" "Permission to proceed with the demonstration, sir," Lorelei interrupted, something in her tone causing Westfield to pause. Colonel Meacham stepped forward. "There is a calibration marker at approximately that distance, General, part of the range infrastructure." Westfield's jaw tightened. "Very well. Proceed, Specialist. Though I should note for our guests that this exercise exceeds the practical limitations of conventional marksmanship." Lorelei positioned herself at the firing platform, making minute adjustments to her stance and her rifle. She opened her leather pouch and removed what appeared to be handmade tools, a small wooden device for measuring wind angles and a tarnished brass instrument of unclear purpose. "Is she serious?" one of the defense contractors asked, not bothering to lower his voice. "That equipment belongs in a museum." Lorelei made no acknowledgement of the comment. She consulted her instruments briefly, then returned them to the pouch. Her movements were unhurried yet precise, each action flowing naturally into the next. The assembled officials watched with expressions ranging from amusement to second-hand embarrassment. Westfield checked his watch again, clearly anxious to move the proceedings along. Lorelei settled into position, her breathing visibly slowing. She made 3 tiny adjustments to her rifle without consulting any instrumentation or the digital readouts nearby. "For the record," Westfield said, addressing the gathering, "the shot being attempted exceeds the documented range of any non-enhanced system by approximately 40%. We're witnessing the very limitations Atlas was designed to overcome." Lorelei either didn't hear or chose to ignore him. Her focus had narrowed to the invisible connection between herself and a target too distant to be seen with the naked eye. She exhaled slowly and pulled the trigger. The rifle's report echoed across the desert. Then silence descended. 1 second passed. 2, 3. The crowd began to shift uncomfortably. Someone coughed. Westfield's mouth opened, clearly ready to use this moment to emphasize his point about human limitations. At 7 seconds, the main monitoring screen flickered. The ultra-distant target, barely visible as a speck on the horizon, suddenly disintegrated in a flash of light that momentarily whited out the feed. "Impact confirmed on primary, secondary, and tertiary optical systems," announced a technician, his voice hollow with disbelief. "Target completely neutralized." Dead silence followed. Westfield stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open, his prepared speech forgotten. The silence stretched until it became physically uncomfortable. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Every eye in the gathering alternated between the screen showing the destroyed target and the woman who had just accomplished what Westfield had declared impossible. A brigadier general, older than Westfield, with silver hair and piercing eyes, stepped forward from the back of the gathering. He looked between the screen and Lorelei with growing recognition. "It's her," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thistle down." The atmosphere transformed instantly. Several officers unconsciously straightened their posture. Two whispered urgently to each other. A defense contractor dropped his tablet, the clatter unnaturally loud in the silence. "Thistle down," Colonel Meacham repeated quietly, approaching Lorelei as she began packing away her rifle. 7 confirmed impossible shots in 3 different theaters. The target elimination in Damascus was you? Lorelei simply nodded once, her expression unchanged as she continued to break down her weapon with practiced efficiency. "This doesn't invalidate the Atlas system," Westfield began, his voice higher than normal, but he was cut off when a 4-star general who had been observing silently from the back approached Lorelei. The 4-star general, a man whose name was rarely spoken outside the Pentagon, rendered a formal salute to the woman who moments ago had been introduced as a mere specialist. "Specialist Thorne has been operating under special designation since 2016, he stated, his voice carrying authority that silenced even Westfield. "Her methods are classified above your clearance, General." Westfield's face cycled through several emotions before settling into a mask of professional neutrality. Around him, the defense contractors exchanged nervous glances, their billion-dollar system suddenly cast in a new light. "Sir," one ventured hesitantly to Westfield, "this doesn't change the operational parameters of Atlas. One outlier doesn't invalidate the system's effectiveness." "Not now," Westfield cut him off, his eyes never leaving Lorelei. The 4-star general placed a hand lightly on Lorelei's shoulder. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "About Khartoum." She nodded once, shouldering her rifle. As they walked away, the assembled crowd parted silently, respect having replaced dismissal in the span of 7 seconds. "General Westfield," Colonel Meacham said quietly, "perhaps we should adjourn for lunch." Westfield nodded stiffly, his earlier confidence evaporated. 15 minutes, he managed, then turned and walked quickly toward the command center. Inside the climate-controlled sanctuary of the command building, Westfield paced the length of an empty conference room. His aide, Major Farron, stood awkwardly by the door. "Who authorized her presence?" Westfield demanded. "I want to know who put Thistledown on my range without briefing me." "Sir, her paperwork came through the secretary's office," Farron replied, consulting his tablet. "Designated as a standard observer." "Standard observer," Westfield repeated with a bitter laugh. "Do you know what Thistledown is, Major?" "Only rumors, sir. Unconfirmed reports from special operations. Some kind of specialized asset." Westfield stopped pacing. "Not some kind, Major. The only kind. A ghost story that operations planners tell each other when impossible shots appear in after-action reports. Damascus, Sana'a, Mogadishu." He shook his head. "But ghosts don't show up at technology demonstrations with antique rifles." In another section of the facility, Lorelei sat across from the 4-star general in a secure briefing room. Between them lay a folder stamped with classifications so high that fewer than 20 people in the entire defense apparatus had clearance to view its contents. "You weren't supposed to reveal yourself," the general said, his tone more weary than accusatory. "With respect, sir, I was invited to demonstrate. As a baseline comparison, a setup to highlight Atlas's superiority." The general leaned back in his chair. "Not to outperform it at twice the effective range." Lorelei's expression remained neutral. "Should I have intentionally missed?" The general sighed. "No, that would have been worse." He tapped the folder between them. "The Khartoum situation has escalated. We need your particular skill set." "I'm listening." The general opened the folder and slid a photograph across the table. Salim al-Bashir, currently in a compound with 3 meters of reinforced concrete between him and any conventional approach, surrounded by civilian structures. Lorelei studied the photograph. "Distance?" "Just under 5 miles from the nearest viable position." She nodded slowly. "Wind conditions?" "Variable. Desert crosswinds up to 30 knots." The general watched her carefully. Atlas calculated it as an impossible shot. A ghost of a smile touched Lorelai's lips. That seems to be going around today. Back on the range, the demonstration resumed after lunch, but the energy had shifted dramatically. Westfield continued his presentation with professional competence, but the earlier swagger had vanished. The defense contractors clustered together, speaking in hushed tones, occasionally glancing toward the command building where Lorelai had disappeared. As you can see, Westfield concluded, gesturing to the final target demonstration, Atlas represents a quantum leap in engagement capabilities. Its integration into our strategic framework will fundamentally alter battlefield dynamics. The applause that followed was polite but subdued. The silver-haired senator who had earlier shown such enthusiasm now wore a thoughtful expression. General Westfield, he said as the crowd began to disperse, remarkable technology, truly impressive. He paused. But I'm equally interested in what we witnessed this morning, the specialist with the unusual rifle. Westfield forced a smile. An anomaly, Senator. Impressive marksmanship, certainly, but not replicable or scalable. Perhaps, the senator replied. But in my experience, General, anomalies often hold the keys to breakthrough advancements. I'd like to speak with her before I leave. I'm afraid that won't be possible, Senator, came a voice from behind them. Colonel Meacham approached, his posture formal. Specialist Thorne has been recalled for an urgent assignment. The senator raised an eyebrow. More urgent than briefing the head of the Appropriations Committee? National security, sir, Meacham replied simply. The senator nodded slowly. I see. Well, perhaps another time. He turned back to Westfield. Your Atlas system is impressive, General, but I think we need to have a longer conversation about integration versus replacement. Some tools, it seems, cannot be made obsolete quite so easily. As the senator walked away, Westfield turned to Meacham. You knew who she was, he said, accusation clear in his tone. I suspected, Meacham corrected. I was in Damascus 3 years ago when an impossible shot eliminated a high-value target through 2 feet of reinforced glass. The official report attributed it to a drone strike, but those of us on the ground knew differently. And you didn't think to brief me? My clearance doesn't permit me to discuss Thistledown operations, Meacham replied. Until today, I wasn't even certain she existed as a single individual rather than a specialized team. Westfield's jaw tightened. This complicates the Atlas rollout. Perhaps, Meacham agreed. Or perhaps it refines its purpose. In the secure hangar at the far end of the facility, Lorelai carefully secured her rifle case in a nondescript government vehicle. The 4-star general watched her with undisguised curiosity. You know what they're calling you now, he said. The calibrator. Lorelai paused. Sir? After Damascus, someone said you don't just eliminate targets, you calibrate outcomes. One shot, one change, ripple effects that reshape entire regions. He studied her. Is that what your grandfather taught you? To see beyond the immediate impact? Lorelai closed the vehicle's trunk. My grandfather taught me that every bullet wants to go somewhere, General. Our job isn't to force it onto a new path, but to understand where it needs to be, then help it get there. The general nodded slowly. The cartoon briefing package is in the vehicle. You leave in 30 minutes. Yes, sir. As the general turned to leave, he paused. One more thing, Specialist. Your demonstration today. Was that necessary? Lorelai met his gaze directly for the first time. With respect, sir, sometimes systems need calibration too. 3 weeks later, Colonel Meacham entered the main command center at the proving grounds to find Westfield surrounded by technicians and engineers, all focused on a redesigned Atlas platform. Integration testing is showing promising results, Westfield said without looking up. Preliminary accuracy improvements of 38% at extreme ranges. Meacham observed the modified system with interest. You've made significant changes. Recalibration, Westfield corrected, finally turning to face him. The Thorne incident forced us to reassess our assumptions. Incident, Meacham repeated. Is that what we're calling it now? Westfield's expression remained professional, but something had changed in his demeanor since the demonstration. The brash certainty had been replaced by a more measured confidence. The Secretary has authorized a hybrid approach, Westfield explained, leading Meacham toward a display showing comparative targeting data. Atlas provides the computational framework, but we're incorporating human intuition factors that our algorithms previously discounted. Factors like minute barometric variations, subtle terrain deflection patterns, quantum indeterminacy at extreme distances. Westfield gestured to a set of graphs. Turns out our system was overcalculating. Sometimes less precision, properly applied, yields better results. Meacham nodded slowly. And Specialist Thorne? Classified, Westfield replied automatically, then sighed. But since you already know about Thistledown, I can tell you she completed the Khartoum operation successfully. One shot, 5.3 miles. Through conditions our system calculated as impossible. And now? Westfield's jaw tightened fractionally. Now she's being brought in to train a small unit, under my supervision. Meacham raised an eyebrow. Your supervision? The secretary feels I would benefit from exposure to, quote, alternative methodologies, Westfield said, the words clearly difficult for him. Apparently my focus has been too narrow. Change can be uncomfortable, General, Meacham offered, but rarely without value. Before Westfield could respond, a junior officer approached with a tablet. Sir, Specialist Thorne has arrived for the 1400 briefing. Westfield checked his watch. 15 minutes early. Have her wait in conference room B. Actually, sir, the officer replied with slight discomfort. She's already in the main briefing room, with the Joint Chiefs representative. Westfield's expression darkened momentarily before he composed himself. Of course she is. Thank you, Lieutenant. As they walked toward the briefing room, Meacham studied his superior. You're adapting well to the situation, General. I'm a soldier, Colonel. I follow orders and adjust to changing battlefield conditions. Westfield paused outside the briefing room door. Even when the battlefield turns out to be a conference room and the enemy is my own preconceptions. Inside, they found Lorelei standing beside a silver-haired admiral in dress uniform. On the briefing table lay a familiar leather pouch and what appeared to be technical diagrams of the Atlas system. General Westfield, the admiral greeted them. Perfect timing. Specialist Thorne was just explaining her methodology. Westfield nodded stiffly. Admiral, I trust you're finding our facilities adequate. More than adequate, the admiral replied. Though I'm particularly interested in how you plan to integrate human intuition factors into a system designed to eliminate them. That's why we're here, sir, Westfield replied, his tone professional. The Atlas system remains the most advanced targeting platform ever developed, but recent field data suggests opportunities for enhancement through selected human factors integration. The admiral smiled slightly. A diplomatic way of saying she made your impossible shot look routine. Westfield met the older man's gaze directly. Progress often comes from unexpected directions, Admiral. The measure of a good commander is recognizing it, not resisting it. The admiral's expression shifted to approval. Well said, General. He turned to Lorelei. Specialist, you have the floor. Lorelei moved to the head of the table with the same quiet efficiency she'd displayed on the range. When she spoke, her voice was clear but still carried that curious softness. The Atlas system represents a breakthrough in computational ballistics, she began, surprising Westfield with her praise. Its ability to calculate standard variables exceeds human capability by several orders of magnitude. She opened her leather pouch and removed the same wooden and brass instruments she'd used during the demonstration. But there are factors that cannot be quantified through current sensor technology. Micro variations in air density, subtle electromagnetic influences on certain metals, the harmonic resonance between a bullet and its environment. Westfield frowned. Harmonic resonance? That sounds more like philosophy than physics, Specialist. My grandfather was both a physicist and a philosopher, General, Lorelei replied without defensiveness. He understood that at certain distances, traditional physics begins to break down. The bullet doesn't just travel through the environment, it interacts with it, becomes part of it. The admiral leaned forward. And you can sense these interactions? Not sense, Lorelei corrected. Anticipate. Each bullet has its own signature, each environment its own pattern. The key isn't calculating the perfect path, but recognizing the natural one. She laid out her grandfather's instruments beside the Atlas schematics. These tools don't measure precisely, they interpret tendencies. For the next hour, Lorelei outlined a methodology that blended intuitive understanding with rigorous discipline, not the elimination of human factors, but their refinement and integration. Throughout her presentation, Westfield remained attentive, occasionally asking questions that revealed a genuine desire to understand rather than challenge. As the briefing concluded, the Admiral addressed the room. Based on what I've seen today, I'm authorizing Project Calibrator effective immediately. General Westfield will oversee the integration of Specialist Thorne's methodologies into the Atlas framework, with the goal of developing a hybrid system that leverages both computational precision and human intuition. He turned to Westfield. This represents a significant shift in approach, General. Are you prepared to lead it? Westfield straightened. Yes, sir. The objective remains the same, even if the path has changed. Excellent. The Admiral gathered his materials. I'll expect weekly progress reports. Colonel Meacham will serve as liaison between your team and Specialist Thorne's training unit. After the Admiral departed, Westfield found himself alone with Lorelei in the briefing room. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them until Westfield finally spoke. Your shot that day, was it luck? Lorelei considered him. Do you believe in luck, General? I believe in statistical probabilities and outlier events. Then no, it wasn't luck, she replied. It was the only possible outcome given the specific conditions present in that exact moment. Westfield nodded slowly. I've spent 7 years eliminating variables, only to discover that some variables can't be eliminated, only understood. That's a good place to start, Lorelei acknowledged. Later that evening, as the desert sun set over the proving grounds, Lorelei stood alone at the edge of the range, her rifle slung over her shoulder. In the distance, she could see the remains of the target she'd hit 3 weeks earlier, still unrepaired, standing as a testament to what many had deemed impossible. Colonel Meacham approached, his footsteps crunching on the desert gravel. The first recruits for your training unit arrive tomorrow, he said. 6 candidates selected from special operations groups, all exceptional marksmen. But not calibrators, Lorelei observed. Not yet, Meacham agreed. That's why you're here. Lorelei turned to face him, the setting sun illuminating her features clearly. Do you know why I agreed to this assignment, Colonel? I assumed orders. She shook her head slightly. I could have stayed in the shadows, continued operating alone, but there's a reason my grandfather taught me what he knew instead of keeping it to himself. Which is? Some knowledge isn't meant to be hoarded or systematized. It needs to be passed on, person to person. She gazed back toward the distant mountains. Technology advances, but human intuition evolves. Meacham nodded thoughtfully. Westfield is struggling with that concept, but he's adapting faster than I expected. He's a good soldier, Lorelei observed, and a good engineer. He just forgot that the most sophisticated system ever developed is the human mind. She handed him a folded paper, her training protocol for the new unit. At the bottom, she'd written, Start with understanding, not calculation. Listen before measuring. Feel before firing. An unusual approach to military training, Meacham commented. For unusual soldiers, Lorelei replied. The world is changing, Colonel. Our enemies hide behind walls they believe impenetrable. At distances they think impossible to reach. They rely on our technological limitations. But they don't account for you. Not me, she corrected. What I represent. The integration of human intuition with technological advancement. That's what Project Calibrator truly is. Not replacing one with the other, but finding the perfect balance between them. As darkness fell across the desert, Lorelei and Meacham walked back toward the compound. Behind them, automated lights activated along the firing range, illuminating targets at standard distances. But far beyond them, in the darkness, stood other targets. Targets at distances most would consider impossible. Targets waiting for calibrators who could see beyond conventional limitations. Tomorrow we begin, Lorelei said quietly. Not just training soldiers, but reshaping how we understand the relationship between human and machine. Meacham glanced at her. And if it doesn't work? If your methods can't be taught? Everything can be taught, Colonel, she replied with quiet certainty. To those willing to learn.